Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited. This is the first time 300 plus episodes into hosting on the Schmooze that we are recording the interview as a live stream. So for those of you who are able to tune in live, fantastic. If you're catching the replay, hey, replay viewers, and we'll be sharing this as an audio only podcast in a few weeks at ontheschmooze.com. But let me introduce today's guest. And don't mind me while I read this to make sure I get it all correct. So today's guest is a champion for women in sales. She has spent her career helping Fortune 500, midsize, and SaaS-based companies grow reputable revenue, hire better, and improve sales culture to one that is inclusive and healthy. She helps fix sales team issues as a master connector. She's the founder of 3 brands created to improve B2B culture: Score More Sales, Women Sales Pros, and the She Sells Summit. She's the author of She Sells: Attract, Promote, and Retain Great Women in B2B Sales, and host of the Conversations with Women in Sales podcast. Please join me in welcoming Lori Richardson. Hi, Lori.
Hey, Robbie, how are you? It's so great to
I'm
be here.
great.
The
This is so
first one.
fantastic. Thanks for joining us from your
Yeah.
place in Tucson, Arizona. I want to just jump right in. I know you know that the show is about building strong networks and the context is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
I think of leadership as paving the trail. I personally was a reluctant leader because I didn't really want to be the boss or at the top, or it's just something that I've tried to have equals around me. But I found in building an organization like Women Sales Pros, for example, we have 50 women sales experts, and somebody has to lead. And so when I first started out, I called myself a convener, and
I
one
like
of
it.
my very good mentors said to me, that's fine and good, but she said the majority of people don't understand what that means, and you're the leader, so you should be the president. And people understand that, people in business understand that, so be the president. And so that's how I did it. But it was reluctantly, and I've grown into it. Now I feel like I can make decisions on they we don't have to have consensus all the time. It's my organization. I have a direction, a channel, a mission, a vision, and as long as I follow that, people can go with it or not. So there's a lot to being a leader, and a lot of things that you really need to think about in terms of who you are and what you stand for.
So this is interesting because it sounds like you had this opportunity to gather, convene people. So clearly, if that was happening, people already saw you as a leader, even if you weren't feeling comfortable with that title. I would love to roll the clock back a bit, maybe a little more than a bit. I want to hear what you were like as a kid, on the playground,
Oh yeah.
or, were you organizing people, or were you running for office, or did people see this sort of potential in you, the teachers, who were you?
Yes, I did. I wanted to be a teacher. I was the youngest of five, and I loved going to the library and reading books all summer. I was kind of a goofy kid that way. And I'm the one that had the lemonade stand. I sold the Girl Scout cookies. I made the macrame deals that I sold. I made Christmas ornaments. So I was very entrepreneurial at a young age, without entrepreneurial parents, by the way.
Hmm.
But I did have a grandmother who was my mentor in business, and she's the one that really I observed and learned all about sales from it without knowing it. But yeah, I did run for office, and I was very much into it, making school better. I bet you were too, right?
I was just thinking about the comparison. I had a neighbor across the street who had a lemonade stand, so I had an iced tea stand
Oh,
because you got to differentiate.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I still was thinking about how much I really wanted that like fancy lemonade, like official, like Lucy's in 5 cents kind of
Right.
stand. That was my desire as a child. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like even at a young age, you had ideas for what would make a better school. You're willing to speak up about those and put yourself forward. And that other people saw that and thought, great, let's give you a chance. And so you were informally and maybe even formally, you said you ran for office.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're doing all that stuff. So clearly all this sort of potential built up in you. In like, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, did you have a sense of what you were going to do with your life? Is there a career path that was laid out at that point? Was entrepreneurship the plan?
No, it was being a teacher. That's
Hmm.
what I thought the whole time. Even though I worked for my grandmother all through middle school, after school every day, I would walk to her. She had a dress shop. I grew up in Seattle, and it was nicer clothing, so more upscale. Her competitor would be Nordstrom,
Hmm.
which back then in Seattle was a small chain, just a few stores, not a big deal. And so it was high end, and I saw my grandmother interact with the salesman that would come through from the market weeks to get us to buy the clothing for the upcoming seasons. And they really tried to push her around, and she always stood on her own, and she'd tell them to go to hell. And they'd say, "Oh, Mrs. Hall, you're crazy, you need this new midi skirt or maxi skirt." She'd say, "No, my customers won't wear that." And they'd call her crazy, and then they'd apologize the next market season. So it was a really good lesson to see as a young person, that it's okay to speak up and to stand for what you believe in. I learned that from her.
What a great role model to have, particularly an older woman speaking her mind to like a male dominated sort of space. And they're
Yeah.
pushing back and she's pushing back harder and standing her ground. She knows what she knows and no one's going
Yeah.
to tell her otherwise. I mean, that's a great thing to see and witness and believe is possible in the world. And then it gives you some ideas. But it sounds like teaching was really the passion, like in a formal way. You meant like a K through 12. Is that kind of teacher you're talking about being?
Yeah, that's what I initially wanted. And as it turned out, I got bored with high school. I got out early, got my GED, and I got my 2-year degree in early childhood education by the time all my friends graduated from high school.
Wow.
So yeah, so I learned all about kids and early childhood ed, so that I did become a teacher of younger kids. I work with 2-year-olds, which was awesome, except that it's a very low paying career, as we've all heard now since we've been through the pandemic, and people find out how poor that field is compensated, along with a lot of other things. And
Mhm.
so and then I became a single mom, and so I realized I couldn't support my family on that. So that's when I left and got into technology sales at the bottom. Just started at the bottom, worked my way.
Wait, that's a jump.
Yeah,
Playing with 2-year-olds for a living.
yeah,
Not much of a living, but a living,
yeah,
and switching to technology sales? Like, who
yeah.
introduces you to this?
Well, technology was now, mind you, I'm older, so this was in the mid 80s,
Mhm.
actually, a little before the mid 80s, around 1984 and 83. And technology was booming. And in business, we had big, massive computers, and people like Bill Gates wanted to put a computer on everybody's desk and put a personal computer, is what we called them at the time. And I thought, well, I can sell, and I really liked technology. I was very fascinated by it, and I just thought, I'm going to sell technology. And so I applied, at 30 different places, and finally somebody hired me. So I was very tenacious, and I just started helping people and worked in retail, and then moved to corporate accounts and did that for about 15 years.
Okay, there's so much to unravel about what you just said, Lori. First of all, how did you know you were good at sales? Is this because of your time selling Girl Scout cookies and lemonade? Like you had the bug from that early age?
Well, and I watched my grandmother, and I realized she built a big business selling, and she would a woman would go in to try on something, and they'd say, "Oh, I'm not a size 10, I'm an 8." And she'd know that it ran small, and she'd go, "Just try it on, honey." And she'd give her the outfit, and she could work. I saw her get a woman to wear a bigger size than what she thought she could wear. And I saw her sell to men for their wives. And
Mm.
I just learned so many great tips about how she knew her buyer and she just went with the buyer. And that's what it is being an entrepreneur as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you can understand who your buyer is and what they want, what they need, you're just a step ahead of them, and you help them get what they want. And in return, you get what you need. So it's a wonderful symphony.
Yeah. It's interesting talking to you. It makes me realize like I have a much longer sales history than I have given myself credit for, because I ended up going into entrepreneur from sort of early days of entrepreneurship in high school to nonprofit and into fundraising. And fundraising
Yeah.
is all relationships as well. And so
Oh, yes,
I've
it
always sort of
is.
said, oh, that's what I'm leaning into when I'm doing sales. But,
Yeah.
I also sold candy in school and bagel sandwiches and
Girl
every little thing.
Scouts. I was a
I did
Girl
Girl Scouts too. Yeah. I did all the things.
That's great.
Yeah. So, this is really interesting, but then to feel like you're going to tie that to a new emerging field of technology,
Yeah.
which you didn't have. I mean, you're on the floor playing with kids. You weren't dabbling
Yeah.
in technology, but clearly you felt comfortable doing something. I mean, it sounds like your grandmother's influence on you is quite profound. The
Yeah.
willingness to kind of go into something.
Now there was a mid step, which is that I realized I needed to do something that paid more. So I was all about the money, making the money to
Mm,
support the family. And so I took a non-traditional course for women on Saturdays in the Seattle area. And so we did everything from scaffolding and pouring cement and all this other stuff. But when the electronics person came in and started talking about technology, that's when I got really interested. And I actually started to go a different direction in actually putting electronics together. And then I realized, no, I'm a people person. I need to get in front of this. And that's when I thought about sales, and it kind of all came together. And, I
yeah.
started on straight commission. I didn't make a penny until I sold something. So I had to be, you had to learn fast.
Yeah. The fact that you sought out an opportunity like this non-traditional
Yeah.
class, which is kind of nowadays, of course, even now, I guess it's still kind of true. These are not sectors that have a ton of women, but
Right.
that you were seeking out these opportunities, that you were willing to work on commission, knowing you'd have the ability to make it happen. But also, you said the first 30 or so places said no.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, yeah, that's tenacious.
Yeah.
Very much so. Did you enjoy it once you got in on that ground level, though? And was it what you
Oh, I
expected
loved
it was
it.
gonna be?
I loved it because there was really good training back then. So companies like IBM and companies like Apple would come in and we'd go through training programs. And Xerox was known for great training. And we really learned
Mm,
how, more about how to sell. And companies don't do that anymore, unfortunately. But it was a wonderful way. And all my peers were young and we were excited. It was a very exciting time to get into the profession. I didn't run into issues about not being a white guy, basically, until my next job. But my first job at a company called the Bite Shop in downtown Seattle, it was amazing, and we pumped a ton of product out of that little store that we worked in.
and how long were you there?
I was there a few years. Yeah,
And then
and
you
then
moved up a little bit?
some of my buddies went to this other company where there were bigger opportunities and more money to be made and more opportunities, but they had never hired a woman in field sales. So I had to have multiple interviews and go around and round with them until they ultimately hired me. So that was
And I
that
imagine the culture, though, may not have been quite ready. So you
right.
were also
It was
groundbreaking.
Yeah, it was never ready the whole time I was there, and unfortunately, I was passed over for promotion and taken off in a valuable account and things like that. Even though I was at the top of the leaderboard, time and time again. In my
Mhm.
first 90 days, I closed a multi-million-dollar deal that the company would not have gotten had I not been there. So that was a really good start, but they just didn't know what to do with me.
Yeah. Did you stay there very long?
No, when they didn't promote me and promoted my peer who had been there less time,
Mm.
basically took me off of my own account, I went to a competitor and took the business away.
Wow. Yeah,
And then they
that's
went out of business, not because it nothing to do with
right.
me, all about them.
Right.
So yeah, but it was a fun group of people I worked with. But it was the computer industry was just really, it
So, but
was
you
changing
spent
a
about
lot.
15 years kind of moving
Yeah,
your way up into, like, different levels of sales, and
yeah.
did you eventually, like, own a market and a region? Like, what how did you end in that role?
Yeah, I ended by in a manager role overseeing a region, and I worked with some very large corporate accounts. And then ultimately, it was just there was just so much turmoil in the industry that I just left to do other things, and then I got into other industries, and but I was always in sales and sold everything from advertising to worked with retail and all sorts of things, and then I ended up my last corporate job was in Boston,
Hmm.
because I came out to watch my son play Division I college hockey. And so I moved from Seattle to Boston and worked for this great company, and it was my last corporate job. So it was
And
great.
what led to the decision to leave that role and become a full-time entrepreneur? And, like, was
Yeah,
there a side hustle at first, or
nope. I was forced out. We were downsized because they were being acquired by a bigger company, Thomson Reuters, which is a massive company. And I had my last role. I had built a corporate university. Again, teaching. Right, I got back to my teaching, worked that in, and they already had a corporate university, and I had a really big salary, and so they were whittling things down to get it ready to sell, and yeah, they became my first client. So because I asked them, I said, "You like what I did, right?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we love you. You just don't want to pay for it." And they said, "Yeah, that's exactly right." So they became my first client, and I had this beautiful training room in downtown Boston until I ultimately moved back to Seattle a number of months later as planned.
wow, okay, so nice that you were able to turn what was sort of a negative into a positive to get them to be your first client.
Yeah,
What led you to realize that you weren't gonna just look for another role? I mean, you'd up to that point been hopping from company to company for a while.
yeah.
Why why decide to, focus on entrepreneurship then?
Yeah, I thought I didn't want to be a salesperson again, although I might have if somebody had twisted my arm.
Mhm,
But I didn't want to be a manager because I don't get as much out of managing other people.
mm,
And so I thought, well, maybe I can help companies grow revenue, and that was the seedling of me building my business, and that was right after 9/11. So
wow,
it was the beginning of 2002. Yeah.
mhm.
And so this is my 20th year this year in
Wow,
business.
congratulations.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And initially, it sounds like the clients you work with were the same kind of people you had previously been employed by. Like, how
Right.
did your ideal client sort of shift over time?
Well, I had a really bad time explaining what I did. So I had a very poor value proposition, and I would
Mhm.
encourage people to work on that in the beginning because that held me back at least for a few years. And finally, I had a friend of mine in Seattle who said, I don't really understand what you do, but I think you could help my client. So he knew it had something to do with helping them in sales, but he wasn't really sure how or what or why. And so he connected me to another. It was a computer reseller that in distribution, which I'm very familiar with, and it worked out really great. But even then, I wasn't clear with what I was doing. Ultimately, I changed the name of my company to Score More Sales. It wasn't named that initially, and and I really honed in on what it is that I offered. And so I really did lose some good time. And I think it's so important to put some money or thought or expertise from marketing into your business. It's just critical.
Did you hire a coach, or like did anyone in those moments start to help you?
Yes, I was really into coaching at the time, and I hired a business coach, and also I hired a marketing company to help
Mm,
me rebrand,
great.
because my old company name was Smile and Dial, Smile and Dial Business Services, Sales Services, or something like that. And it was real cute, but companies didn't say, this is a really powerful company that could probably help us. Smile and Dial Revenue Generation Services. That's what it was.
Hmm.
So so anyway, once I rebranded, people immediately wear a logo, score more sales. Everybody's like, yeah, how do I get some of that? And it was a brilliant move. No thanks to me, but to the brilliant marketer that helped me rename it.
Well, I mean, thanks to you for knowing you needed some outside help and being
Yeah,
willing to invest in that outside help, because I think early in owning a business, there's not a lot of money coming in. So people often spend the money in ways that are not necessarily the best ways. Like they buy a lot of tech, or I mean, I don't know, there's a lot of ways to waste money and feel like you're doing something for your business. But
yeah,
investing in a coach and this marketing agency helps you
yeah.
get kind of on the right path. And has it changed again? Like, I know you have a focus on helping women in sales. Are you really more now doing a blend of teaching as well as consulting, or like what's the makeup currently of your business?
Yeah, it hit me that my Score More Sales company, which has other people involved in it, we are continually working with different companies, mostly in tech, and they're very male majority. They're very white male majority, and it hit me in 2015 that I didn't know what was happening. Like, why don't sales teams look like buyers do? And act like buying teams do. And so I really wanted to put an effort into learning and doing some research, and so that's what I started doing, and then just helping companies to have more inclusive sales teams of all types. So it started with women, but it's really expanded, and I I I love the profession of sales, and I really want it to be more reflective of who we are as a society today.
Mm. And your teaching roots,
Yeah,
right? Like always a teacher
always
finding
a
ways to add
teacher.
value. Yeah.
Yeah,
It sounds like you had a few different challenges along the way. Early on, it was the branding, then it was deciding your audience, it was adding new things. Like, have you built out a team to support you? How do you
yeah.
decide what's in your lane? What's the things you need help with?
Yeah, I have a team in place. A couple of them are employees. Most are contractors who work with other companies to some extent, but they're very loyal and they're very good. And I think that's a good way to build when you're early on. Now I've adapted that mindset. It works well for me because I can scale up or down, and I have very much a lifestyle business, although it's been it's a multi six figure business. And yet I don't feel like I have a ball and chain, leading an organization like mine. I would
Mhm.
love to get it to $1 million, which I haven't done yet. So that's one of my goals, just because most women don't have, most $1 million businesses are not, and over are not led by women. I
Mhm.
just want to be like, see, I did it. So I
Right.
don't know. I don't know if that's a good enough reason. What do you think, Robbie?
I don't know, it's funny, I had the same, like, question about those goals, because
Yeah.
I actually left there was someone who was helping me doing some marketing, and we were on a group call, and he made some suggestion, and I said, "Well, I don't know if I'm gonna wanna do that," and he goes, "Well, if you wanna get to $1 million," and I said, "Well, I didn't say that that was my immediate goal," and I ended up leaving, like, that role. I stopped working with them because I was like, I don't know, like, I think it'll happen if you keep doing the good work, but it does
Yeah.
mean expanding your team and your capacity.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on your lifestyle choices in a way,
Yeah.
because it's not necessarily more money in your pocket. I mean,
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
it sounds really good, but then
Yeah.
you're like, well, I mean,
I,
the
I
net
got a
may
pretty
not be
nice
this.
setup right now. Yeah. I'm pretty
Yeah. So
happy
if
with
if
how
you have a
things
sweet
are going.
setup, I don't know. But I get like your point about there just not being a lot of women who have $1 million businesses, and that
Yeah.
is something that it sounds like you're equipped to help other women do, whether or not you choose that immediate goal.
Right.
And I think it's really interesting. Like you've pulled together just an incredible array of resources, the book, podcast. Like it seems like you're trying to really create a community around what you're doing. And you said it started about being about women, but it sounds like it's the underrepresented
Yeah.
folks in
Absolutely.
tech and in sales,
Yep.
and really trying to like bring together those folks and create space.
Hmm.
What's been your biggest observation in the last couple of years around how that's changed? Has the pandemic changed anything in relation to these communities and how they're being perceived in sales, or like, yeah,
I
like,
think I really think George Floyd's murder and social justice movement. I was really surprised, happily surprised, at the young people that came together and everybody of all races came together, and all genders, to rally around that, and that really inspired me. And it also showed me that we still have a long way to go, and I really was focused on more women in sales, and I wasn't really focused on underrepresented people in general, but it expanded me because it was like, well, why wouldn't you, like, why would you want just more women, and not other, just anyone that wanted to be a part of it? Why can't we make space for that, and why can't we make people feel welcome and promote them and encourage them? And so it kind of went from there, but it was definitely during the pandemic that my eyes were open.
wow, sounds like you then really widened the scope of your mission and in your reach and who was included in the tent that you're building, which is very powerful. And the resources you're providing, I imagine, would help a lot of different kinds of people, get their foot in the door and work their way
Yeah.
up that ladder. Is there some way in which you're helping with culture because of the experience that you've had? Because I think getting hired is one thing, feeling comfortable enough to stay, I mean, that seems like a really big challenge.
Yeah, and that's the inclusive part, the piece that isn't just about checking a box. Like, yeah, we interviewed, multiple people and different people, and we ended up with these people. But it's something to have people ask you your opinion and see if you can help change something or modify something within your group, or your organization or your team. And and that's where I want to be. It's not about checking boxes at all. I've seen that happen. So much lip service, or so many people talking, and just not enough people actually doing things, because I think we don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to say the wrong thing about gender, or we don't want to say the wrong thing about race, or we don't want to say the wrong, we're worried about, people, calling us out or what have you. And I just would love to see a place where I can say the wrong thing and with best of intentions, and someone else understand that, and just help guide me toward, another way to say that, or something that might be more inclusive. That's what we need to cut each other some slack, and give some grace around these things.
It's hard to be a good ally. Allies are often thrown away really quickly when they make a misstep. But if people are
Yeah.
trying, I agree with you. Like, crossing that bridge part way to meet them and help them do better if they're aiming to
Yeah.
do better is really key, because we can't just do it no matter who the we is. Like the we can't
Yeah.
be just contained to a small group of people. The more we can unite around our shared values, we can achieve a lot more,
Yeah.
create progress. I love that you're doing this in the context of sales, because when I think of sales, I mean, I happen to like sales. I like relationships related to sales. I get sales, and I don't think of it as icky, which I know some people listening are like, oh, sales. But it is interesting as a lever for this conversation. It's very interesting because, as you said earlier, why doesn't the sales team reflect the people we're selling to?
Yeah.
And we know as entrepreneurs that people choose us because of who we are. Like,
Right.
like our value proposition is often tied to how we show up in the world. And while a lot of people can help you with X, I mean, I'm a lot of things in the world. I'm a business growth strategy coach, and I produce virtual events. And I know whenever people are choosing to work with me, it's because of me and the
Yeah.
skills that I bring. And there are other people they could be, but I'm like, I'm not comparing myself to that market. I am doing this particular thing. And I
Yeah.
think that when we feel like we can't share who we are in a work context, that's a loss. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting lever to use with sales because it's a place where people put a lot of emphasis on hiring, and obviously it has to do with the bottom line, have to do it
Yeah.
right. So it's kind of interesting to think about DEI and sales like in the same
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, it's my lane, it's what I love. I say that sales is an admirable profession, and
Mm.
it doesn't have to be like Wall Street or, some of those movies that people have seen. Greed is good, and all that kind of stuff. Um, uh, it's people bring different things to the role too, and for a very long time, business was built by men, sales was built by men. It's very much a boys' club, and it was a more aggressive, hardcore driver, kill them, close them kind of a culture. And it doesn't have to be that way. And the rest of us can bring great gifts to the table. And people are learning that that's helping sales teams. When we have diversity, it raises revenues. So it's all good. So there's no downside to doing it. It's just hard for people to change, and it's hard to it's just hard to go from just saying something to actually doing it. Change is hard.
Yeah, it's hard to move away from just checking the boxes to
Yeah.
actually doing the work. I think I find that true in a lot of instances, particularly this one.
Yeah.
So, as you've done this the last 20 years and you have your career before that, you've met all kinds of people from all walks of life, from all kinds of industries, and you've grown an amazing network of people. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you have built that network and how you've sustained it. And I always imagine there's that like core group of people that you're going to stay in touch with, whether it's regularly or infrequently, but it'll never feel like it's been a long time and you'll always catch back up. But then I
Yeah.
always think about that second and third tier or second and third layers out, the people that you see once a year at a conference, or maybe you worked with them 5 years ago, but you haven't had a reason to talk to them recently. These are people you like. I should mention that.
Yeah.
You like
Right.
them, they like you. How do you think about nurturing and sustaining those kinds of connections? Like any habits, philosophies, or practices?
Yes, that's a great question. And it's something I've worked on for a long time. I call that second layer strategic referrers in business. I mean, they're also friends, but they're people who can refer you multiple times. And, I call it the third list because we have our first list is our existing customers. Our second list is our prospective customers, but the third list are those people who can refer you on an ongoing basis, and you do like them and you do meet up with them, and they understand a little bit about what you do. Some of them may have services before your service or after your service. That's a great combination. And then it's a matter of being mindful and keeping in touch with them. When I started my business, I sent out 50 postcards every month for 12 months. I had these postcards that had motivational quotes on the front. So it wasn't about, hey, I'm doing this, but it was a motivational quote. And then on the other side, I just said, hey, happy November. What's new? What are you doing that I can help you with? How can I support you? And then I signed it. And that's what I did to help get my name out there, to build referrers that could remember what I do, because you got to stay in people's mind. We do this interview, it's great, and then we do 50 other things, and you're not going to be thinking about me, and I'm not going to be thinking about you unless I send you a note or send you a postcard. So I did it every month for a year. And I went into one of these folks' offices, pre-pandemic, of course, years ago, And they had all 12 of the postcards on their wall. And I found out that wasn't the only person that did that. There were at least 2 people, because they were cool. They were inspirations. And so do something that adds value to other people and get in front of them on an ongoing basis. And if you do that, then every time, they think of sales, they're like, well, if Lori doesn't know, she can refer somebody in her network. And it works well.
You made me think of my realtor. I bought my first home a year ago, and I'm
Yeah.
now realizing I should interview him for this podcast because he's great. But we closed, and he sends, I don't know exactly what frequency. It's not monthly. It's a little less frequent than that. He'll send a postcard with a recipe.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then, of course, if you like the recipe, you hang it on the fridge and it stays there for a while.
Right.
So it's just like you said, it's memorable and
Yeah.
it keeps them top of mind. And,
Yeah. Top
between
of
that and
mind.
his great customer service during the experience of actually buying a home,
Yeah.
I would absolutely refer him. And then I was thinking also of, I interviewed Chandler Bolt. Chandler Bolt launched self-publishing school when he was very
Oh.
young, and it's grown enormously, and he's a multi best-selling author. And early on, he wrote thank you notes, one a day, to people he
Yeah.
admired. And in the end, a lot of those folks reached back out and mailed him books and scheduled calls, and he did his handwritten letters.
Yeah.
So
I love that. I
yeah,
do that too. I met a leader at Microsoft, and she had a huge organization. And whenever it was somebody's birthday, she would do a handwritten note, and it was a massive undertaking in her big sales team, but she did it, and it was quite impressive.
yeah.
People don't forget that.
Yeah, right now I've been using a service called postable.com. I
Yeah.
initially reached out to use them because I needed a way to manage an online mailing list, or address book, I guess I'd call it. And I didn't use their service to send cards for like a while, until I realized I need to get out of my own way. Like mailing them by hand, I just never got to it. It didn't
Right.
matter how simple I made it. So now if I see something posted and I got the most beautiful voice note from someone, I sent a sympathy card. I saw
Yeah.
what they wrote on Facebook, and I
Yeah.
found their address and I sent them a card, and it happened to show up the day of the funeral. And I
Mhm.
mean, you don't do this for business, but
No.
then she said, after I read it out loud to my husband and I read it out loud to my mother on the phone, I thought, given what Robbie does in the world, we could work with him. And so now we're going to do some work together. And so, and
Yeah.
again, I think you just show up for people. And I love your
Sure.
postcard idea, that they were well designed, thoughtful, inspirational quotes. And that's a really neat way to get on people's radar and stay on their radar.
Yeah, and if you get mail, like I guess some people don't anymore, but those of us that do, the little cards are on the top. That's the thing I open first. I don't know about you,
Of
but
course,
I open the cards, and and that's great.
that's really neat. Are there any other ways you're staying in touch with the folks?
Well, my LinkedIn, I started on LinkedIn about 2 years after it started, and I'm something like member number 23,000 or something. So way back now, they have hundreds of millions of people. And I kept track of people for referral. That's how I started, was that whole strategic referral concept. But I also want to keep track of my colleagues that I worked with in Boston when I left there. And then of course LinkedIn, blew up like it has. And in my database, so I also use HubSpot. And in my HubSpot, I categorize the different types of relationships I have, whether it's a friend, whether it's a strategic referrer, or someone from certain industry, when we do meet up in tech, trade shows and things. And I keep all that. I keep track of all of that because it helps me to stay organized. And you can't just rely on LinkedIn to serve up who they think you should see. You have to be proactive. And I also use LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which I've paid for years, and I've never had any regret in doing that. And I am alerted to the things that are happening in their world through Sales Navigator.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so now I have two questions. One, how much time does it take for you to maintain your HubSpot coding people and tracking and all those things?
Nothing special. Just code them as they go in. So we're really good about keeping track of everybody. Any potential lead or conversation that we have related to business goes in HubSpot,
Hmm.
and every person has a classification.
Hmm.
So it's pretty easy.
And then with Sales Navigator,
Mhm.
you just started to make a use case that was more appealing to me than the ones I usually hear for Sales Navigator. So tell me more about how you're using this upgrade, because
Yeah.
I keep not thinking it's worth it. Like I haven't tried it, but
Well,
now I'm
first
like,
of all,
oh,
I have a great mentor named Bryn Tillman,
I
who
love
is
Bryn. I
my,
have interviewed Bryn. Bryn's a good friend of
oh,
mine.
good. She's in my Women's Sales Pros group, and she just did a presentation last week in Atlanta at our event. And she just reminded me of some extra uses. But what I do is I keep lists. I track by whatever I'm sorting on. So for prospecting, I'm looking for VPs of sales and higher who have changed jobs, because one of the things we do is we help companies figure out their existing sales team makeup. So if you're a new VP, you're walking in, you don't know what you have. If you're existing, you're probably part of the problem, and you're not as interested to talk to somebody like me about
Mm,
seeing what you have. So I'll have a list like that, and then it will update with, every week when there's a new, someone puts in that they're new. I also do it by region. So we moved to Arizona. I want to know what cool businesses are in Arizona, because I do some local work, and I'm, building relationships with people. So that's another one. And then just depending, I'm going to Dallas in a few weeks. So I wanted to see who was there. I'm going to be speaking in Las Vegas, so I'll look by geography and see who I'm connected to, first degree and second. So second degree connections, where there's a lot of gold, because those are people that kind of know you and might have seen your stuff, but we don't know, we don't talk on a regular basis. And so
mhm,
there could be a lot. It's a weaker tie, as they call them, weak
right.
ties, which can really be valuable.
I love this because it is sort of frustrating to use the basic LinkedIn and do those kinds of geographic
Yeah.
searches. Facebook made it, they took that feature away. If I'm going
Yeah.
to be in San Francisco or Las Vegas, like I'd
Yeah.
like to know who else I might run into.
Yeah.
So that already makes it really appealing. And then you're layering in like lists and different sort
Mhm.
of search functionality and it being updated. I could see a lot of people listening thinking, oh, I wasn't really going to use that, but
Yeah.
I don't have a hardcore outbound sales strategy, but I have a hardcore networking strategy,
Yeah.
which ultimately is sales. But
Right.
it's making me think about this. And I'm going to reach out to Bryn, because if I am going to use their free thing for a month, I want someone to coach me on how to make use of it.
Yeah.
Because I also know that I sign up for things and then don't always use them, because that's
Yeah.
the
She's
danger.
she's very good at saying, do this, and this.
Yeah,
And you
we'll put a link to her podcast in the show
oh,
notes, because she
good.
has an excellent podcast and live show as
Yeah.
well. And I learn a lot from listening to her. So as we're wrapping up, I have sort of one of my favorite wrap up questions here, which
Yeah.
is, I do hope we are going to stay in touch, Lori, and that a year from now, I suddenly realize it's been a year since we did this interview, and I'm going to want to ask you in that moment, hey, what are you going to celebrate? Like, what's been going on this past year?
Yes. I'm going to celebrate more women in B2B sales, and particularly in sales leadership. And we'll be able to cite some specific examples and work to literally change the face of sales.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to celebrate that. And I would love for people to find you and follow your work. What are the best ways for them to do that?
Yep. The best way is I'm Score More Sales, at Score More Sales, on most everything: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. And we have pages for both Score More Sales and for Women's Sales Pros. So that's probably the best way. Reach out and connect to me on LinkedIn, and reference this show so that I know, because I get a lot of requests.
Yeah, we'll put all those links in the show notes, as well as your podcast, Conversations with Women in Sales.
Yes.
And you can find that all at ontheschmooze.com. Lori, thank you so much for this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Robbie. It's really been my pleasure.